right, everyone, welcome back to the STOA. Today we have with us Allison Duettman. So Allison is the president of the Foresight Institute, which is a non-for-profit advancing research in biotech, nanotech, computing for the long-term benefit of life. In the past, she has shared Foresight's work with the public through publications in the Wall Street Journal and discussions at South by Southwest, Effective Altruism Global, and TEDx, where she actually just recently released a talk on our topic today, which is existential hope. Her early research is focused on AI, but her knowledge base is far more vast, encompassing many of the issues we've actually previously discussed here on the STOA, especially pertaining to our previous meta-crisis symposium relating to existential risk, global threats, biotechnology, civilizational design, and many, many more. Allison's work differs from many in the existential risk space by instead framing our current moment through a lens of existential hope, which I've personally found to be pretty damn inspiring. So Allison, thanks for joining us today. I'm going to hand it off to you. I know you have a presentation for us, and then we'll get into some questions.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. Well, it's really nice to meet all of you. I wish I could say that my knowledge base is vaster than AI now. I definitely, I definitely don't think so. But perhaps there may be nice, nice future compatibilities arising out of the two. So I don't want to cause too much excitement here. But I would love to do today is give you a mashup of two of my most recent talks. And the last one being a very interactive way in which I want to get you to think and get your feedback. So I've never done this before. Maybe it's going to fail, but I would love to actually know what you think, because I think existential hope, that's what's exciting about the topic, is that it excites people and that it is hopefully an action motivator for the future. So I want to know what motivates you. But before we get there and get to that question part, I want to just give you a little bit of a contextualization of a few good ways how I think we could think about the long-term future. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. This will be really quick. If you want more info on this, I can send you the proper talk about this later, but I just want to kind of pique our excitement here a little bit and our interest. Oh, now I'm sharing it. It's not what I want to do. Let's see, where is it? Stop share. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Let's do this again. I will share the presentation properly with all of you afterwards, but I think for now, let me present it first. All right, so this will be a very, very brief run through, but some of you may know the website existentialhope.com. No worries if you don't know it, don't go on it now. There's more time afterwards. It's a volunteer effort in which different people come together to try to collect exciting visions about the long-term future, some that inspire existential hope rather than existential angst. The whole project was inspired by me reading this paper from Toby Owen and Owen Cotton Barrett on existential risk and existential hope, where they basically juxtaposed the concept of existential hope to that of existential risk. I think to me personally, it's also really related to the concept of existential angst, because I think it also has this motivational component, right? Rather than this more angsty feeling about the long-term future, I think it's really important that we kind of motivate ourselves to really think in more positive terms, because I think ultimately if we only have our eyes on where we don't want to be going, and we may end up going there instead. So why not just instead think about the directions in which we do want to go? There's one really cool concept in that paper as well, which is a eucatastrophe. So that's kind of the opposite of a catastrophe. So if a catastrophe is something after which the long-term expected value, let's say of civilization is much lower, then a eucatastrophe would be an event that would be extremely good, after which the expected value would be much, much higher. So I think there's a few nice plays on words. So I encourage you to check out the paper. But enough of the philosophy here. What I want to talk to you today about is a few ways in which we can maybe start thinking a little bit more positively about the future. So this was from a member gathering from 1994, which then I think inspired this Extropy magazine article, in which different people in Foresight's community have predicted the long-term future of different technologies, and they were all very, very hopeful. Let's not get hung up about the fact so much of whether they were right with those particular predictions, but I think looking back at those predictions, many of them are still really, really desirable. And and I think not all of them are achieved, but nevertheless, I think we just have to keep on plowing. Why am I showing you this? I want to show you this because this was in 1994, right? People were so hopeful about the future. Not sure what really happened since then, but I want to give you a few kind of like quick glimpses into the types of structures that people were creating back then, just to afterwards kind of inspire you to also to think a little bit longer into the long-term future as well. So this is, those are predictions here, right? But I want to give you like a history of the future in 5 hope-inspiring innovations, really quickly, only to then motivate you to think that long in the past, also that long into the future. So first one, we had the Dolphin. That was actually one of the first private space efforts, and it was incredible, not only because it was the first sea launch attempt, but also because it paved the way for much of the commercial space legislation that we have today. It wasn't even clear back in the days whether commercial spaceflight would ever be allowed, and so I think much of the work there was really trying to get that rolling, get that started. And 2 people in the foresight community, Gail Pergamet and James Bennett, were really influential in this, and were involved in this project. And whenever they show me pictures like that, I'm just like, oh wow, this was already in '84, and now we have sea launch attempts again. And so I think having that long-term time horizon really allows you to think a little bit longer in terms of how much it takes for technology to actually come online after you've had the first prototype be successful. Same here, very, very different field, but this was the Amex, the American Information Exchange, 1984. Meanwhile, this was before the web browser. And the problem that it solved was that until then, the only way that you could get information was via reading and kind of randomly browsing journal articles or mailing lists and so forth. And this was really the first kind of attempt at creating an interchange where you could ask a specific question, someone could consult you and generate a document for you that would answer that question, and then you could pay them for their answer. So that was one of the first expertise kind of prototypes out there, really. Now we have a multiple of them, but meanwhile, this was a long time ago, right? Mind you, and it was cool not only because it had this really ambitious knowledge creation aspect, but also because it had some of the first smart contracts, which was a split contract. Basically, parts of the arrangement where you pay someone to answer your question was automated. The other one was still in prose, so that you could then arbitrate, so that you could then, if you weren't happy with the document that someone was answering you for your question, you could then kind of like abort the smart contract version, move over to this to the prose contract, and then have an arbitrator look and actually see whether the person generated the document that you wanted. So why is this interesting? Because now we have the smart contract system and everyone's super keen on the whole automation system, on automating everything. But actually, I think what's going to be much more realistic is we automate a little bit, we have a little bit more on prose, we have a little bit still with the technology of reputation. So I think very different complex cooperative arrangements via smart contracts have already been tried a long time ago, and I think also the way of the future. We had Habitat, right? Now we have the whole thing about NFTs, we have the whole thing about different people starting different virtual nation states, and different people moving into Decentraland and all kinds of different blockchain-based system. And meanwhile, one of the first prototypes thereof was Habitat in 1986. And that was really a fully booted community, a virtual community that had different tokens that you could trade. They had many of the problems that we have in real society bubble up as well. You had folks that wanted gun laws. You had folks that really wanted to have their guns. You had citadels forming. You had all kinds of different emergent properties that we have right now. And I think now that many people are excited not only about the virtual nation state concept, but also really about things like seasteading and things like charter cities and so on. I think it's really useful to maybe go back into those early simulated environments and see what actually worked and what didn't work. Another one, Project Xanadu. We all know the web, we all love it, but we also all know that it could be better, right? There's a lot of echo chamberization and so on going on. Why? One of the reasons is maybe because we don't have hyperlinks. Hyperlinks are links where instead of only linking one way to a document, as we can do now, you can also link back from that document, or you can always link, if you disagree with a document, you can link with your disagreement to that document. So if I'm reading a text, I can not only read the text, but also all the objections against that particular argument in a text, and they're fine-grained. That's only one of several features that they proposed back in the days in Project Xanadu. Another ones were transclusions, where you'd have like little pop-ups here that would explain you a certain thing. But those were all really ambitious projects really early on. And we have the web that we have right now, but there's many web 3.0 efforts currently going on. And I think going back into those early development efforts is really useful for finding out what kinds of features we may want in the technology that we want to build in the future. Likewise, idea futures. Many of us know prediction markets. Many of you may be on Metaculus. We had one of the first idea futures run at our Foresight member gathering in 1999, and people really betted physically there. This was from Robin Hanson, who really from you originated the whole idea. You could basically make predictions about the future and then trade on how well you think, how well you thought that you knew what was happening in the future, and then you would generate for yourself a profit and better knowledge for the whole system. And you have many of these experiments going on right now. Metaculus is a fantastic project that is currently doing forecasting. And then you have Algo and Gnosis, a few of the blockchain-based markets coming online, because betting is still prohibited, or like predicting is still prohibited against money, because it is still classified as betting. So I think thinking about better ways in which we can generate better predictions for the long term. I think COVID showed everyone that when you have exponential processes going on, exponential numbers climbing, then having accurate predictions early on is very important. So I think those things will only become more important as we move along. Why am I showing you this? As I already alluded to at the beginning, I think if we set ourselves really long-term goals, then we can start thinking about the technologies that we have as versions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of attaining long-term really important goals. So let's say you want to have knowledge composition. You had Project Xanadu back then. Now you have decentralized social networks like Roam and Sprightly. What's the version 3, right? Ask yourself, like, if the types of technologies that you're building now wouldn't just be a random thing, but would be like a new version, an iteration, and a really long-term toward a long-term goal. How would they differ? And I think if you have this long-term kind of history perspective, you also get a little bit more ambitious in the types of goals that you set for your organizations. And I think this is the best hope and action generator, really, because it makes it really concrete, the kinds of long-term goals that you can be striving for. And also, if something doesn't work in the next 5 years, never mind. Early pioneers also had really long-term dreams. And so, if you want to have like a little bit of an image of that, I think we can think of ourselves. We often think of ourselves as, we are a moment in time in the present. But actually, if you look back, the present is an outcome of past games. And also, if you look into the future, we are now setting up the civilizational playing field for the games of the future. So I think, seeing yourself as like one part in this open source multi-generational software project is a really nice way to look and also to derive meaning from your work, even if it's boring on a day-to-day value. But we can kind of contextualize ourselves more in this long-term positive striving. And this is all that you're going to have from my presentation. But I think, why am I showing you this? I know that we're now at 17 minutes, but I think before maybe we go into a Q&A where I answer your questions, which I'm super excited about, I wanted to ask you 5 questions that I think may inspire you to think a little bit more long term about the future. So I think what I've showed you so far is technologies that are now coming online that took a really long time to prototype. And now I want to go through 5 different areas and ask you 5 questions. They'll be really quick, but I actually want you to think about them, about technology areas that I think will be really important in the next 30 years. And I think having your mind made up about where you want to be and what kinds of futures you can be striving for can be quite exciting. Okay, are you ready? So my personal pet peeve, the thing that I think I'm most dedicated to, is health and health extension. So I want to ask you, just imagine, what would it mean to have 80 more years of healthy life years? 80 more years, right? So whatever you currently think your life expectancy is, 80 more of those years, and ask yourself now, what would you do in those 80 years? Just take 10 seconds, and maybe we can get to a few of those answers actually in the Q&A. If you feel like sharing them here in the chat, 80 more years, what's the number with that one thing on your to-do list? I really want you to think about that. Okay, question number 2, intelligence. And not only AI, but also augmented intelligence. rather than asking yourself, perhaps, what kind of, questions would you like the answer to with enhanced intelligence? Maybe ask yourself now, what questions could you ask with enhanced intelligence? So not only what would you like the answer to, but what would you even ask? Right? That's a different question, because that is asking something about uh, about one step later, rather than just answering what you currently like to know. So what kinds of new questions on hypothesis could we form and could ask? All right, third question is about matter and energy. What would you build physically if resources, cost, and externalities were not an issue? What kinds of physical structures would you like to build? What would you change in the world of atoms if resources, costs, and externalities were not an issue? Right? We are currently developing many of the technologies that may make that so. And I just want you to actually imagine what a world like that could be like and why it would be very desirable to inhabit that. Okay. Fourth question, space. What could it look like to see the universe with life? And I want you to ask yourself, how far would you personally go? Where would you settle? And what would you build there? Would you go all the way and maybe never come back? Would you be some of the ones that are keeping planet Earth safe and nice? What would you do with planet Earth? So ask yourself, if that was now available, what would you actually do? In which of those groups would you be? Why is it desirable to be there? Or is it, not everyone has all of the dreams, right? Those are 5 possible technology-enabled dreams. Maybe only one of them is exciting and you find all the other ones terrible. That's fine. I find all of them exciting, but but you may not, and that's okay. Okay, and now I want you to ask yourself the most important question of all. So usually I think what motivates the whole existential angst approach to the future is this question of, well, why me? Perhaps, I can't make a difference. Why would I think of myself as so grandiose to actually try to change the future and try to avoid and avoid some of the existential risks that we're so worried about? How could I possibly think that I'm important enough to make that crucial difference? There's clearly so many more powerful entities moving about that I can't influence. What if I spent my whole life trying to make a difference, and then in the end some existential risk that I didn't know about comes along and kills us all anyways? So that's the usual question that you get, I think, and that's the more, I think, existential angst motivated one. Now I want you to ask yourself as the last question the opposite of that, which is, think about the last 5 questions about health, about intelligence, about matter and energy, and about space, right? And about the amazing futures that you came up with there. And now ask yourself the question, what if at the end of your life, someone came along and told you that the thing that you wanted most would have been possible if only it had been for your activism and the skill that you've given and input that you could have made, but instead you chose to do nothing? So that's the opposite of the questions of like, what if my skills don't matter? It's the opposite question. It's the thing like, what if they do, right? And if you find that a really, really terrifying future, to know at the end of your life that maybe you could have been the one make that crucial difference, then I think you're already on the existential hope side, right? And you've kind of tipped into that kind of thinking, and you're protecting yourself by opting in against the possibility that you could have made a difference, but you chose not to. So it's kind of protecting yourself against the upside risk, if you want, of knowing that it could have been you. And I think, this is the way that we never think. And it's the way that's, equally plausible, I think, to think. So why not think this way? This is much more motivating. And I think the moment that you think this way, you also have given up all of the entitlement to be negative, and to be grumpy and to be cynical. Right now, you know that even if the chances are low, you're still just going to go ahead and do it. And if you fail, well, that was one of the options. The other option was that you succeeded, and it was because of you. So I think, after you've actually tipped into that, and it is a decision, but if you opt in, then no space anymore to be terrified, and no space anymore to be cynical. Now, we're acting from a place of existential hope, and I think, and I think the more people do that, the better communities we can create, and which we can better support ourselves to actually strive for those better worlds rather than just tear ourselves down. I think in Balaji Srinivasan's words, you like win and help win. And I think, that's the kind of world that I want to live in. So I think ultimately it's all expectations and acting on other people's expectations. And if you put something good out there, I think the chances are likely that someone else takes it and gives you something nice back. So I think, I just want to motivate you all to think more along those lines, because the more of us do, the more of us will. That's all for me, and I'm very much looking forward to our question.
Allison, that was awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to maybe tell everyone to just start throwing your questions into the chat. And while you guys do that, Allison, I'll pose you a bit of a question to start us off. When you look at the landscape of the world right now, on a personal level, what area or areas, I guess, give you the most existential hope? What sort of fills you with excitement when you look out into the world today?
Well, very clearly for me, health extension. And that's because that was the reason for me why I got into the whole thing in the beginning. Like, I think life is so fantastic, or it can, in its best moments, be so fantastic, so utterly amazing, that I think the most important thing is to secure life. And it's not. It is also because aging is on the root causes of many of the diseases that we actually care about. So actually, if we want to tackle diseases, it would be much more efficient if we tackled aging first. But it is also very much for me that more long-term transhumanist dream of, hey, life can be so good if only we don't kill ourselves first. And so I think health extension is to me the number one thing. But then the moment you think about that, the moment you think about your own health extension is also the moment that you become very, very worried about existential risk, because your continuation only matters if there is a world and an amazing life to be had for everyone, right? Otherwise, it's really not very worth it to extend your life if you're going to extend it into suffering. So the moment you think about your elongated future, that's the moment that you become very, very concerned about nuclear weapons and all the other types of existential risks that we focus on at Foresight as well. But that is really the number one driver. But from there also, I think everything else follows. And if people are maybe potentially interested in joining our efforts there, so we have 3 groups at Foresight at the moment. I'm leading the Biotech and Health Extension group. It's a group that is supporting people who are making progress on radical life extension. And there's a group of scientists, entrepreneurs, technologists, and institutional allies. And there's an application sheet for that on our website. The second group that we have is on molecular machines. So if you're working in an area of trying to actually create better, or trying to compose atoms better together so we can build better stuff for a better health and better planetary health, then we have a group for that as well, that supports that. And the third one is a group on intelligent cooperation. So this is the work that I'm currently writing a book about better ways that we can help humans and emerging intelligences cooperate. Because I think the moment you think about existential risk and about long-term civilizational survival, you realize that cooperation is actually the driver of most of the progress that we want to make. So if you're working on cryptography, any tool in crypto commerce, AI, or machine learning, then that may be a group to apply to for you. But yeah, those are a few areas.
That's great. Thank you. And then on top of that, I guess a question diving into some of your background is, how did you come to really, really care about this area of existential hope, existential risk? Was there a switch that was flipped for you at one point where you were looking at the landscape of risk and angst and realized that there is a more optimistic way of moving forwards?
Well, actually, I think I don't know. No, not really, because to me, I've always been very, very optimistic. And I do think that, if you go back into the archives or back and read early sci-fi, right, there wasn't very much dystopianism, right? It was really just, early, really ambitious dreams and ambitious goals that were being explored. And, I think from then, as people realized, oh man, those things are possible, that's where they then made the second step that I just iterated on in my previous answer of like, oh, with so much possible, there's also so much on the line. So really, let's hone in on the existential risk and first get to security first, before we can think that long term. So for me, it comes really from a very, very positive aspect that there really is just so much on the line, and that we owe it to our ancestors who have gotten us to where we are, and we owe it to all the future versions of ourselves and future generations, that we just like don't mess it up now. It's like it's kind of crucial, and but I think it's coming from a very, very positive positive approach of that there's just so much on the line, right? Why otherwise worry?
Totally. I think that's a very wise perspective. It sort of reminds me of, we had Thomas Moynihan, who was associated with the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford here a few weeks ago. And if I'm remembering correctly, one of the quotes from his recently released book said something along the lines of, in the sort of industrial revolution era, people said that never has there been a time when people demanded so much of the future. They were so excited, basically, looking forwards, thinking the future is going to bring us so much greatness, so much technological revolution. And he sort of turns that on its head now and says, rather than us being at a time where we demand so much of the future, never has there been a time that the future has demanded so much of us. And I think that sort of weaves in nicely with what you just said, where we've gone through that sort of techno optimism, and it's still very much a hopeful perspective of the future, while coupling that with the recognition that a lot of work needs to be done to secure that potential future. So I think on that note, I'm going to move into the questions that we have in the chat. Kevin, why don't
Yeah,
we?
I just want to say one thing.
Yeah,
Like,
go ahead. Go ahead.
let's just say that, often, if especially if I have this chirpy voice and I'm so excited and stoked about the future, I think it's really easy to come across like as Pollyannish, right? And come across as this totally person that is risk, like, yeah, blind to risks and so forth. I totally get that. I don't get that criticism for the first time, but I just want to draw attention to the fact that in not only in those groups but also in the work that Foresight does, we are really very, very risk aware, right? It is just that even within that research, it is sometimes really good to just remember why you're doing what you're doing, right? So that's why, to me, that existential hope angle is very much also sometimes more an internal action motivator, rather than only the technologies that you push, right? Even if you work on risks, right? And what like, even if you work on risk, that is a very, very, very important area to work on. I'm not saying everyone should just go work on technology. We definitely need to think about the risks, and we need to think about them really hard, right? I think looking into a future with automated surveillance, with potential automated enforcement, with our current computer security infrastructure that is just totally maraude. Like, we need people to think about the risks really clearly. Otherwise, we end up destroying ourselves by accident, if not intentionally. So definitely don't get me wrong, right? The risks are super important, but sometimes work on the risks, especially, can get you very, very into that mindset of like, wow, it is crazy that we haven't blown ourselves up yet. And for those people, I just want to also offer that that perspective shift of like, there's so much on the line, like, let's keep pushing in an optimistic way. So it also has this more internal action motivator component for me.
Well, and especially, in the area of existential risk, one of the things that we discussed with Thomas was the sort of burnout rate that you get in that area, because it's such weighty, heavy topics to be sort of contending with on a daily basis. I think what you're bringing to the floor is just so useful and actionable from an internal sense, and very, very valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I think really it's those people that work on the risk and that actually take it upon themselves to think about the likelihoods of the fact that we may not make it through and what to do about it. I mean, that's an insane, like, just responsibility to have on your mind. And I know the burnout rate there, right? I know, but it's you who we need the most, right? So all of you, please, stick with us. This is very much, an appeal to all of you, that it really matters, and that, yeah, that a lot is on the line, and also that people are really grateful and very appreciative, I think, of the fact that people do care.
Well, I think we definitely have some people in the audience who are willing to sort of sink their talons into this fully. So why don't I pull up Kevin, if you want to unmute yourself and maybe ask your question live, and then we'll move on to Margaret.
Yeah, Allison, you already sort of addressed this with like authoritarian mass tech surveillance, but what are the areas that give you the most existential dread, and what are your thoughts about how these can be addressed?
Oh, well, yeah, so that's, I would defer to you if you're interested in that, to the Intelligent Cooperation Program on our website. And I can share the special link here in the chat. But basically, it really is that problem of, okay, if we have much more automation, then the risk, generally, I think over time, the risk of, I think Bostrom calls it small kills all, of a small number of people being able to inflict a greater number of harm on many people, that becomes increasingly important. On the other hand, most solutions against that are also, I think, not very favorable, which are often top-down solutions that are trying to have complete control, either via complete surveillance or via complete automated enforcement. So I think oftentimes, on the one hand, we have this problem that the more complex and the more democratized our technologies get, the easier it is for a small number of people to create big harm. The default solution to that, what's often proposed, is more, I think, more centralized system that have more power over people, that have more of an ability to crack down. But I think they may also pose an existential risk, or like a risk in themselves, just by virtue of the fact that if you have one single entity with a lot of power, you don't know, A, are the actors in that entity good? B, can they be corrupted? C, you now have a single point of failure. What, if something goes wrong in your calculation. So I think usually decentralized systems are the ones, that are evolutionarily stronger and that are also more anti-fragile. But those systems are also the one in which a small number of people can cause ever greater harm. So what we are doing in the Intelligent Cooperation Group is finding a way in which we can use decentralized technologies of cooperation, from cryptography to smart contracts, blockchains, and so forth, to create systems that are more secure for a bigger number of people, and that can actually create decentralized defenses against many of the harms that come from democratizing technology. And so we're trying to go the middle way, by which we defend against, on the one hand, potential threats from automated surveillance, from automated technologies of ever greater distraction, but also on the other hand, try to defend against the threats that come from top-down centralized solutions in having cryptography enabled decentralized systems. So that's that group, in case you're interested in that particular work.
Yeah, thank you. When this is over, if you could share that in the chat, that'd be awesome. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Kevin, do you have any follow-up there?
No, just I'll read about that later. Okay, there it is. Thank you so much.
Great. Why don't we move on to Margaret, if you can unmute yourself and throw your question up live.
Sure. Thank you, Allison. My question is about timescales. So what kind of timescales are you thinking on or working with, and why?
Oh wow, that's a very good question. Well, I would, yeah. So here's a very speculative. So first of all, I think that there is no time scale long enough for me. I guess the reason why I'm into life extension is not because I want to live infinitely, but because I want to live indefinitely, in the sense that I want to decide when I'm done, right? And I think it's the ultimate. I think having that freedom to choose what your preferred timescale is I think something that we have never had the ability to achieve. And I think that actually by if you want people to think more long term, then I actually also think that health extension and personal health extension is a really good way to do that, because that is what gets people thinking on longer time scan and on longer time scales. I think if it is possible for people to potentially know that they can reach escape velocity in longevity in their lifetimes, then I think very suddenly people will have much longer time horizons. Because on the one hand, you can care about your work of art being protected on the very long, on future generations being protected on the very long. But I think if you know that there's personal skin in the game, that it may be you. I'm not saying that without that it's not valuable, but I'm saying that more and more people can be made to have longer time horizons, also via personal health extension. So I think ultimately it's up to everyone for themselves. I personally have a very long one. That's why obviously I wouldn't mind if people had a longer time horizon. I think one good way to do that is via the mechanisms of having themselves have skin in the game.
Are you Are you able to clarify at all by what you mean by long? I find that to be a very subjective word based on who I'm speaking to. So I'm curious, like, is long for you 1,000 years, 10,000 years, like a couple centuries, couple decades, kind of anything that you can share on your mental model of how you're thinking about impact across time based on possible, I don't know, bifurcations in the temporal future?
Well, I mean, I think it's very hard to say what's going to happen on a very long time horizon. But I just, for example, recently had a very funny discussion with a friend of mine about Permutation City, which is a story by Greg Egan. I don't know if people here read it, but it's about copies, like basically brain emulations that get ported into a digital universe, and then they have they kind of spurn off. They spurn off another, like a virtual world, which is infinite, so which cannot be shut down, even via some, sci-fi tricks, even not via the laws of physics. Very late stage universe. They just expect it to continue indefinitely. And I just remember reading this and being so excited, and then talking to a friend of mine who thought it was terrifying. If you have like you lock away the key and you just like with it, and it could go on indefinitely. But I, for example, tend to think about life, and that's not for me. I read it somewhere, I'm butchering by who, but I really thought that stuck with me. I really tend to think about life as not one book with one narrative arc that goes somewhere and then it drops down toward 80 years coincidentally, but rather as a book that could potentially have many different chapters, and maybe not different chapters, but maybe those chapters are different short stories, right, written by different authors, and those different authors could all be different versions of yourself. So I think just by realizing that the longer I live, the more things I discover that I think are very exciting reasons to be alive, and that I would like to explore more if only I had more time in my life. That's what makes me think that I wouldn't get bored very quickly. And actually, I have no desire for it ever to end right now. Ask me again in 10,000 years, maybe that's a very different attitude there. But I think the stakes are very different then anyway. So I can't put a bound on it yet. I think it would be hard to get bored. I actually think we may have the opposite problem. Like if I only extrapolate from the longer I live, like there was a time in my life when I thought I could actually read all of the books that there were. I think when I was 16 or something, I was like, okay, here's my list. I just work through all of them. And then eventually I discovered, no, the more books you read, obviously, the more you know that you don't know. And since then, that has never stopped, right? Like the more you learn about life, the more amazing things there are to discover that I would do if only I had the time. And maybe that rate eventually tinkers out, right? But then, you can always do something a little bit different, tweak something a little bit longer. Like there's so many, at that point, there will be so many people, to also research. Like there will be so much history by then that even just following up on all the things that have happened by then would we still be exciting enough to be alive. So I find it really hard to come up with a scenario in which I would get bored. And if so, it will be so far in the future that I almost don't dare thinking that far, because the opportunity cost is way very heavy then.
Yeah. May I ask one more follow-up question?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, this is just my impish side, but do you think that there's a possibility that by giving people longer lifespans that they'll actually do less with it? Like some sort of reverse, I don't know, logical fallacy. Kind of how like when you have really large corporations with huge budgets, they're not actually able to innovate, as well as a small startup with like far higher constraints and less financial resources. Do you think there's any potential for some sort of reverse incentive situation with longer life?
Yeah, it depends really on like what you think is valuable. Like I think that currently there's so many things that are cut short by our current lifespan, that I think that is the much bigger worry. If some people go slower, some other people may also have much longer plans. I think the problem of having I think those people that would struggle with longer time horizons. I'm not sure if I find it really hard to imagine. I find it very hard to imagine that would be the case. And even if maybe they're enjoying life a little bit longer along the way, that's not the worst, right? It's just it's not like, I wonder what is the specific thing about, is it laziness that you're worried about? In which case, I would say, well, if laziness is, also attached to you just enjoying your life a lot in the meantime, rather than just hustling in crazy hour shifts all day long, just because you think that you have to achieve this one thing just because you're so time constrained, then I would say, well, that's not really wasting your life away if you're having a good life instead and treating it a little slower. So I find it hard to imagine a time where I would say that time is now wasted. And I do think that, if the only thing that I think I wouldn't like is if progress got slower through that. And I don't think that would happen just because of the fact that people now have longer life and longer time horizons in which they would actually take on bolder problems than they currently are able to. So yeah, it's an empirical question. I'm not sure, but I'm not worried about it so much.
That's great. Riffing off that, I'm going to tag in Chris, if you can come up with your question.
Hey, Allison, thanks for the talk. Yeah, I find that talking about X-risk and systems change can be quite heady and abstract. So I use meditative practice to go back into the body to give that balance within myself. So my question is, do you see spirituality fitting in within the distant future? How can we include embodiment in a world that is obsessed with data?
Well, that's a good question. I think that spirituality is, for me, a difficult word, just because people have, it is so subjective that people have very, very different definitions of that. I think that contemplation and appreciating the reasons why you are alive, that is very, very important. I think that, definitely elevated states, whichever way you choose to bring them about, and having those ecstatic moments that are kind of sublime, that remind you again of why you're doing the work that you do day to day, are really important because they make you more efficient at doing the work day to day, but also B, they are the reason why you're doing the work day to day. So I think, if you don't have those every once in a while, then I think why live, right? Like why turn away at things if it's not for those moments in which you transcend, and in which you realize, right? Like why you're doing the things you do. To me, those experiences I have personally when I'm around animals, in particular dogs, when I'm dancing, when I'm with close friends, and when I'm on top of a mountain. I think looking down from a mountain, you get this overview effect of suddenly realizing just how small the world is that you usually think, in which usually your problems live. Like when I go on top of the San Francisco mountain, Corona Heights, I see literally where all of my friends live in that city. And I suddenly, feel that all of the problems that I worry about in that little house are so minuscule. And you have this really lovely overview effect that kind of elevates you and just puts your head back at the right place. So I think those moments are, what you live for ultimately. Yeah, they're very important.
I guess my follow-up would be my second question around like embodiment in a world obsessed with data. Well, because Jamie is here and she's doing great work with the Society Library and adding context to the sort of wisdom that we need. Yeah, so it's sort of like the debate around AI, in which how can you improve collective sense making when it's has to do with more than just getting the right data. It's all about context as well. So can you touch a bit about that as well?
Yeah, totally. That again goes back into the work that we do with the Intelligent Corporation Group. So there's this, let's say, long tail problem by which AI systems are really, really good at I think at grokking data very quickly about most general cases. But then there's also outlier cases that require perhaps more contextual understanding. And those are, I think, the types of cases in which local knowledge is really important, that many of us humans have, but that may not be able to be groked so easily by AI systems yet. And there's a fantastic paper from Ali Yahya from Andreessen Horowitz, who speaks about decentralized autonomous organizations and how they could turn into those creators of the types of services that you may not be able to automate away with more top-down AI approaches, but that very much rely on different people collaborating with their local knowledge of their specific individual situations that they're in, and being able to compose larger knowledge generation that way. I think Hayek and his approach to society of civilization perhaps more as a collective super intelligence that arises very much via more peer-to-peer interactions is one that I hold quite dearly. And so I'm very much on board with that. I do think that context and local knowledge is really important and is potentially sometimes still, at least it could, I think it deserves more attention. I'm going to post the paper from Ali that I just mentioned here in the chat on decentralized autonomous hive minds.
That's great. I'm going to tag in Gordon with his question about leadership.
Great. Thanks, Evan, and thanks, Allison. Quickly, my question is, who are you looking at today as people who are active on national or global stage as truly inspiring leaders? Or there's two sides to my question, really. One is, who's inspirational, right? Who's motivating in an inspirational way? And who's actually practically leading organizations that are doing really good work right now, from your perspective?
Well, I actually think that that's not really a question that that makes much sense in the way that I think about what will be important or what I hope will be important in the long-term future. I hope that rather than asking who's leading those generations or those organizations, I think you should be more asking about the types of cooperative frameworks that make more decentralized collectives really effective. So I think many of the most effective projects that I've been a part of, if you had asked who's the leader, I don't think you would have gotten a really good answer there. So I think that's why that group of intelligent cooperation that we have is all about better ways in which we allow decentralized groups and individuals to cooperate better amongst themselves for longer term goals. And so I think, maybe a better question really is, okay, what are better tools that we can give people so that they can use their local knowledge to compose better into better collectives? But I think if you want to know the individual people that I personally, whose work I admire, then I think a look on the programs in the different groups that we have in biotech, health extension, and intelligent cooperation may make sense. And I think that there's a tremendous group of people, but one person that I want to point out maybe is Marvin Minsky. His book Society of Mind, so he was very, very early on a Foresight advisor, and his book Society of Mind, he's also one of the founding fathers, often said to be of artificial intelligence, but his book Society of Mind very much drives, I think, my thinking about the world home in a really beautiful way. It's an amazing book and very much focused on the different agents that we have not only in our head but also in society, and how they create ever more complex system of cooperation that increase knowledge. So I think very much focused on not one leader but on the collection of people together that create better structures. Yes.
Awesome. Now, I missed a little bit of it because of some background noise, but I see the chat window came through with naming the author. So yeah, that's great. Thank you. No follow-up.
And that was a phenomenal answer. So Allison, thank you for that. So I've got to ask, do we have a hard stop for you at the top of the hour? Do you mind if we go a few minutes over? Just either one is fine. I'll just dictate how many more questions we have.
We can go 5 minutes over or so. I think I also took longer with the presentation, so I think it's only fair.
Okay, that's great. Then I'm going to tag in Max with your question about aging and society.
Yeah, so what, in your opinion, are the potential social repercussions of abolishing aging? Like will we have to reorganize society where potentially some people will want to stay young forever, potentially, and some people won't?
Also, great question. There are a lot of different questions, sub-questions to your question. If I can only recommend a few writings to that, because I won't be able to do them justice here, is from Sonia Arison, 100 Plus. So she is basically going through every single societal change that we will go through once we live over 100 years, and kind of plotting out current graphs and how that may change, how that affects disparities and so forth. So that's a really, really thoroughly researched question. Then I also created a Google Doc, which is common objections to health extension and why I think they are wrong. I can link that here as well, in which I go through a few of those. There's Aubrey de Grey, and I have done a talk on this too. So I'm well aware of, of the fact that there's a lot of things that we need to think through. I just also think that if you now imagine being in a future society in which aging is a thing of the past, in which that is the default, right? And that is certainly a future which we could inhabit. Then I think thinking back of a time when people died involuntary deaths, in incredible pain and suffering, with like diseases and conditions like Alzheimer, then I think that will be an incredible amount of suffering that that I think is definitely the worst option here. So there are many things that we have to think through, but I do think that if we were in that default, the current situation would be just unbearable. And I think if you only read one thing, if what I say now rings with you in a weird way, or if it offends you, if you only read one thing about this, then it is The Fable of the Dragon Tyrant by Nick Bostrom. It's a very short novella about why it is that that fighting aging should be our #1 priority. next to the priority, I think, I think of it as like, don't die personally, and then also world, don't die. So those are two very important things that we need to get around to. I think as long as we don't do either of the two, we have a good future anyways, because the rate of progress is so incredible already that we just need to keep going, and we just should not stop now. It would be really sad.
Okay, can I just follow up very quickly on that? Because I'm actually quite well aware of this work, because I used to be the co-leader of the Transhumanist UK party. But that being said, one of the issues that I found in the whole adventure is that we need to address the social repercussion of those technological advances before really we can just lay down the fact that it will be a good idea. Because like there are certain things that needs to be addressed on a social level, but here it's like, okay, like let's give some hypothesis forward potentially of what it could look like, and because it's not gonna like some people is gonna offer a lot of resistance towards those ideas. That
Yes.
is to be expected.
I think you're really right. One of the things that we discussed at Foresight, and we may hopefully get to it next year. And if anyone wants to help, then please let me know. I'm a little time constrained at the moment, but it's one of the things that I want to do is basically the modeling that Sonia did in her book 100 Plus, where she goes through different societal changes and how it will affect us. We can now do an update of that, and we can actually go through with the data that we have and just see, how does it affect population size on a long scale, right? How does it affect different disparities? How does it affect different systems? And then having that in mind, actually going proactively to politicians, who for whom that may be really important problems, and actively say, hey, this is the society that you may already be living in, just because people's health spans already get longer. What if we could now have those lifespans, those longer lifespans, be healthier, right? What would that mean? What kinds of like proactive systems could we in place there that make this a smoother transition? Because A, it's the right thing to do, and B, it's also the right thing to get as little pushback for this sort of thing as possible. I do, think that there are answers to all of those questions, but I very, very much would welcome anyone who's interested in that to work on that. We did consider doing a more thorough analysis of that, and so if anyone feels inspired to go through the data and to do that with us, then please hit me up.
I always love when coming from these conversations, there's an opportunity to sort of further pursue some of the topics that we've communicated here. So that's an awesome proposal for outreach, and obviously we really appreciate that proposal. So I think, Allison, this is probably all the time that we have, and I just want to thank you so much for coming on today. I'm going to tag Peter back in just to go over some of the upcoming events. But again, this was just really illuminating, and especially coming off of the discussion that we had with our sort of meta crisis symposium that really focused on a lot of existential risks. I think, at least personally, I came away from that feeling a great sense of weight and angst looking forwards, and being able to tie in this sense of just fantastic hope and optimism about the future, while coupling that obviously with the issues that we have in the world. I find your perspective on this to just be very, very optimistic and illuminating. So I just want to really, really thank you for that. So on behalf of everyone, I think thank you very much, Peter. I'm going to hand it over to you and everyone who showed up today. Thanks so much for coming.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Evan. Echo a lot of your thoughts. In Stoicism, they have something called the Stockdale paradox, where you like have steely-eyed on the problem, how fucked up things are, but you don't let go of the existential hope. They didn't call it that, but this is why I think it's so important, this meme, and putting emphasis on it. So thank you for the work you're doing, Allison, and coming to the Stoa today. Love to have you back. Upcoming events at the Stoa. One tomorrow, there's this intersubjective modality called circling. And this is going to be the first time where there's actually like a PowerPoint presentation on it. We're going to have the history, ecology, and potential, and how it could be in service towards existential risk and the meta crisis. So check that out. That's a free event for all. And then Gail Bradbrook from Extinction Rebellion is coming in May 11th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Our meta crisis maven, Evan, is going to be emceeing that one as well. So you can come back at the Stoa to check that out. So everyone, thank you for coming to the Stoa today.
Thanks.